25-year-old virgin decides to take care of the millionaire's wheelchair-bound son. The millionaire who hired her knew every detail of her life, even the ones she tried to forget. But before we tell this story, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The mist covered the mountains like a thick veil when the taxi left Isabel at the iron gates. The driver hesitated before leaving, casting a final concerned glance at the young woman descending with a single suitcase. She herself felt a shiver run down her spine as she contemplated the expanse of ivy-covered walls, but she swallowed her nascent fear and rang the ancient bell. The sound echoed like an omen, making her question, not for the first time that day, if she was truly prepared for what awaited her. The amount offered in the advertisement was too tempting to ignore, especially for someone like her who had always lived with so little. 25 years of a contained existence shaped by the rigidity of a religious education and the constant weight of loneliness. The gates opened with a metallic creak without anyone appearing to receive her. Isabel took a deep breath, adjusted the modest dress she had chosen especially for the occasion, and began walking along the stone path. The century-old trees formed a natural cathedral above her head, their intertwined branches filtering the afternoon light and creating unsettling shadows on the ground. The mansion gradually revealed itself through the fog, an imposing early 20th century construction with its tall windows and ornate verandas. It seemed like the kind of place where old stories happened, where secrets were kept for generations. And it was exactly this sensation that made Isabel hesitate on the last step of the main staircase. Before she could touch the bronze knocker, the door opened. The man who appeared before her was not what she expected. Theo Harrison had a presence that immediately filled the environment, tall with aristocratic features and eyes of such a dark brown they appeared black. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, but there was something of a barely contained wildness in his posture, like a wolf wearing city clothes. "Miss Isabel Sanders." It wasn't a question. His voice was deep, controlled, with a tone that suggested command without needing to be raised. "Welcome." She felt his gaze traveling over every detail of her figure, not lasciviously, but like someone examining a work of art looking for imperfections, or perhaps confirming expectations. There was something familiar in that scrutiny, something that made her feel exposed in a way that her modest clothes couldn't protect against. "Mr. Harrison," she struggled to keep her voice steady, "I appreciate the opportunity." "Enter." He stepped away from the door, allowing her to pass. The entrance hall was a study in marble and dark wood, dominated by a curved staircase leading to the upper floors. "I imagine you're tired from your journey. Martha will show you to your room where you can freshen up. In an hour, I'd like you to meet me in the library to discuss your duties." A middle-aged woman dressed in a discreet grey uniform materialized silently beside Isabel. There was something tense in her face, a shadow of concern she was trying to hide. "This way, miss," murmured Martha, taking Isabel's suitcase. As she climbed the stairs, Isabel felt the weight of Theo's gaze on her back. She didn't need to turn around to know he was still there, observing her ascent like someone contemplating a piece moving exactly as planned on a chessboard. The room designated for her was larger than any room she had ever slept in. An old four-poster bed occupied the center, flanked by mahogany nightstands. The tall windows offered a view of the abandoned gardens at the back of the property. There was something melancholic about the untended vegetation, the moss-covered statues, the beds that must once have housed roses. "The bathroom is through that door," Martha indicated, placing the suitcase on an upholstered bench. "There are clean towels and personal hygiene products at your disposal. If you need anything, there's an intercom beside the bed." Before the housekeeper could leave, Isabel gathered courage to ask the question that had consumed her since reading the advertisement. "The boy, Jacob, what is he like?" Martha hesitated, her hands nervously clutching her apron. "Jacob is special. A good boy, perhaps too quiet for his age, but it's not my place to speak about him. Mr. Harrison will explain everything you need to know." With those words, the housekeeper withdrew, gently closing the door behind her. Isabel was left alone with the heavy silence of the old house and the growing sensation that there was something much bigger than a simple caregiver position waiting for her. While unpacking, her fingers brushed against the wooden rosary her aunt had given her before departing, her only link to the life she had left behind. For a moment she considered saying a prayer, as she always did in moments of doubt. But there was something in that house that made the sacred words seem inadequate, as if the very walls held secrets that no prayer could touch. The old wardrobe creaked softly when she opened it to store her few clothes. The mirror inside reflected her image, a young woman of fragile appearance with long brown hair tied in a severe bun, large, frightened eyes, and lips that rarely smiled. There was something Victorian about her appearance, as if she herself were a character from a Gothic novel. As she prepared for the meeting in the library, Isabel couldn't help but think about Theo's look, that gaze that seemed to see through her, as if he already knew her long before that first meeting, as if he had been waiting for her. The antique clock on the wall marked the minutes with relentless precision. When there were 5 minutes left until the appointed time, Isabel was ready, dressed with the same care with which a person prepares for a confession. Her reflection in the mirror showed someone who seemed to simultaneously belong and be completely out of place in that environment of old wealth and veiled secrets. Leaving the room, she found Martha waiting in the corridor to guide her to the library. The path through the house was a labyrinth of waxed corridors and closed doors, some locked with ancient keys. The portraits on the walls seemed to follow her with their painted eyes, generations of the Harrison family observing the new inhabitant of their domain. With each step, Isabel felt the weight of the decision she had made in accepting that job. But there was something more beyond the financial need that had brought her there, a kind of calling that she couldn't explain, as if her entire path to that moment had been carefully traced by invisible hands. Martha stopped in front of a carved oak double door and knocked softly. Theo's voice sounded from inside, commanding them to enter. When Isabel crossed the threshold, the first thing she noticed was the smell: old books, leather, polished wood, and something else, something that reminded her of church incense. The library was a majestic environment, with shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes. A circular wrought-iron staircase provided access to the higher levels. In the center of the room, a large work desk dominated the space, behind which Theo was seated, his figure silhouetted against the diffuse light entering through the high windows. "Sit down, Isabel," he said, indicating a chair in front of his desk. There was something hypnotic in his voice, a natural authority that did not admit disobedience. "We have much to discuss about your role in this house." As she sat down, Isabel had the distinct sensation that she was about to sign something much more significant than a simple work contract. What she didn't know yet was whether she was prepared for the price she would have to pay for this decision. The library seemed to swallow the sounds of the outside world, creating a bubble of silence where only the breathing of the two occupants could be heard. Theo stood up, moving with the predatory grace that Isabel had already noticed before. He walked to one of the shelves, his fingers sliding over the spines of the books as if looking for something specific. "Your curriculum is impressive," he began, without turning around. "Degree in education, specialization in special education, experience with traumatized children, exactly what we were looking for." Isabel frowned slightly. She didn't remember sending such a detailed curriculum. In fact, she had only responded to the advertisement with a brief letter of introduction. "Jacob needs someone with your particular qualifications," Theo continued, finally turning to face her. "Someone who understands that some wounds go beyond the physical." "The accident," Isabel began hesitantly. "The accident that left him paraplegic happened 2 years ago," Theo interrupted her, his voice assuming a harder tone. "But that's not what we're talking about, is it? You know there's more." She didn't know, in fact, but something in his gaze prevented her from saying so. There was a disturbing intensity in the way he observed her, as if he expected her to complete a puzzle whose pieces she did not yet possess. "Your functions will be simple, but absolutely crucial," he continued, approaching the desk again. "Jacob needs constant supervision, Not only because of his physical condition, but because of his sensitivity. You will sleep in the room adjoining his. All meals will be served at established times. There is no internet on the property, and the use of cell phones is strictly prohibited. Complete isolation? Isabel asked, her voice firmer than she felt. A humorless smile curved Theo's lips. Complete protection. The outside world has nothing to offer Jacob except more trauma. Here, he is safe. And you will be too. The last phrase hung in the air, like a promise or a threat. Isabel felt a shiver run down her spine, but kept her gaze fixed on the man in front of her. When... Can I meet him? He's waiting for you now. Theo pressed a button on the intercom on his desk. Martha, bring Jacob to the library. The minutes that followed were filled with a charged silence. Theo sat back down, his eyes never leaving Isabel's face. There was something almost hungry in his gaze, as if he were memorizing every detail of her expression. The soft sound of wheels on the floor announced Jacob's arrival. Martha pushed the wheelchair carefully, and the boy in it seemed even smaller than his 9 years suggested. He had the same dark eyes as his father, but where Theo's were penetrating and dominating, Jacob's were deep and melancholic. Jacob, Theo said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly, this is Isabel. She will be taking care of you from now on. The boy raised his eyes slowly, studying her with an intensity that seemed beyond his age. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled, a small and hesitant smile, but genuine. You have pianist's hands, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Isabel felt her heart tighten. Do you like music? Jacob is talented, Theo intervened, a touch of pride in his voice. Even after the accident, he continues to play. The music room is always at your disposal. The boy lowered his eyes at the mention of the accident, his small hands tightening on his lap. Isabel had a sudden impulse to hug him, protect him, but restrained herself. Perhaps we can play together someday, she suggested softly. Jacob nodded, still without raising his eyes, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. Martha began to guide the chair out of the library, but before leaving, the boy turned one last time. You will stay, won't you? He asked, a note of supplication in his voice. The others didn't stay. Before Isabel could respond, Theo stood up abruptly. It's time for your rest, Jacob. You will have plenty of time to get to know Isabel later. When the door closed behind the boy and the housekeeper, silence returned to weigh in the library. Isabel felt a mixture of emotions stirring in her chest, compassion for the boy, curiosity about the others he had mentioned, and a growing uneasiness about the man who now observed her with an indecipherable expression. There are rules in this house, Isabel, Theo finally said, his voice returning to the authoritarian tone. Rules that exist to protect Jacob, and you. He opened a drawer in the desk and removed a thick envelope. Your contract, read it carefully. The salary, as discussed, will be deposited monthly. You will have 1 day off every 2 weeks during which you may leave the property if you wish. But while you are here, your dedication must be absolute. Isabel took the envelope, feeling the weight of the expensive paper between her fingers. And if I need to contact my family? There is a telephone in my office. You may use it once a week under supervision. He paused, his dark eyes fixed on hers. I understand that this may seem extreme, but Jacob needs stability, consistency. Someone who won't abandon him like... He didn't complete the sentence, but Isabel could feel the weight of what was left unsaid. There was a story there, buried under layers of protection and control. Like his mother, she risked, her voice just a whisper. Theo's face instantly hardened. My wife is dead. That subject is closed. But there was something in his tone, a note of tension that suggested that nothing was really closed. Isabel nodded, storing that information for later. Martha will show you the rest of the house and your new room next to Jacob's, Theo said, clearly ending the conversation. Dinner is served at 7. Don't be late. When Isabel stood up to leave, he called her one last time. And Isabel, welcome to the family. The word family sounded strange on his lips, as if it were a concept he didn't fully understand. As she followed Martha through the corridors of the mansion, Isabel couldn't help but think that she had just entered a world where words had different meanings, where shadows hid more than darkness, and where each smile could be both a promise and a warning. The rest of the day passed in a blur of instructions and discoveries. Her new room, connected to Jacob's by a discreet door, was smaller than the previous one, but equally elegant. The windows gave onto a different part of the garden, where an old swing moved gently with the breeze, its rusty chains creaking a melancholy music. While unpacking her suitcase for the second time that day, Isabel found her rosary again. This time, she left it on the nightstand as a reminder of who she was and where she came from. But when she looked in the mirror to prepare for dinner, she saw something different in her own reflection, a subtle change, as if the house were already beginning to leave its mark on her. The sound of the old clock echoed through the corridors, marking the passage of time with relentless precision. In a few hours, she would sit at the table with Theo and Jacob for the first time, beginning a routine that would change her life forever. What she still didn't know was whether this change would be her salvation or her ruin. Dinner was served punctually at 7 o'clock in the spacious dining room. The solid mahogany table, long enough to accommodate 20 people, seemed even more imposing with only 3 places set at one end. Isabel observed the arrangement of the old silverware, the silver candlesticks, the crystal glasses, everything speaking of an old and established wealth. Theo was already seated at the head of the table when she entered, guided by Martha. Jacob arrived soon after, his wheelchair being carefully positioned to the right of his father. Isabel occupied the place to the left, feeling the weight of the silence that hung over them like an invisible curtain. "Do you pray before meals?" Jacob asked suddenly, his dark eyes fixed on her with curiosity. Before Isabel could respond, Theo intervened. "We don't do that here, Jacob. You know that." "But she has a rosary in her room," the boy insisted, his voice small but determined. "I saw when Martha was cleaning." The look that Theo cast at Isabel was penetrating, almost accusatory. "Your personal beliefs are your choice, Isabel, but I prefer that you don't share them with Jacob." There was something in the way he said this that made Isabel shudder internally. It wasn't just a preference, it was a veiled order. She nodded silently, but noticed how Jacob's shoulders fell in disappointment. Dinner proceeded in a silence, punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery and the occasional request to pass a dish. The food was exceptional, a perfectly prepared fillet, fresh vegetables, a red wine that Theo drank alone. Isabel observed how he cut the meat on Jacob's plate into small pieces, a paternal gesture that seemed strangely mechanical. "Can I show my drawings to Isabel after dinner?" Jacob asked, breaking the silence again. "It's late," Theo responded without raising his eyes. "Tomorrow you will have enough time." "But I want to show them today," the boy insisted, a tone of urgency in his voice that made Isabel pay more attention. "It's important." "Jacob," Theo's tone did not admit discussion. "I already said no." The boy lowered his head, but not before Isabel noticed the shine of tears in his eyes. Without thinking, she extended her hand under the table and lightly touched Jacob's small hand. He didn't look at her, but his fingers intertwined with hers for a brief moment. The rest of dinner transpired in absolute silence. When Martha came to take Jacob to bed, he cast a final, meaningful look at Isabel, a look that seemed to contain a request, or perhaps a warning. "One moment, Isabel." Theo's voice stopped her when she was preparing to follow Martha and Jacob. "I would like a word with you in the library." The path to the library seemed longer this time, each step echoing in the dark corridors. Theo didn't turn on all the lights when they entered, leaving the environment partially in shadow, illuminated only by an old lamp on his desk. "Sit down," he commanded, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from a crystal bottle. He didn't offer her any. "We need to establish some boundaries." Isabel sat stiffly, her hands crossed on her lap. "Yes, Mr. Harrison." "Theo," he corrected, a humorless smile curving his lips. "If we're going to live under the same roof, we can dispense with some formalities." He took a sip of his drink before continuing. Jacob is sensitive, impressionable. He becomes attached easily, and that can be dangerous. Dangerous for whom? Isabel asked before she could contain herself. Theo's eyes gleamed in the half-light. For everyone involved. The other governesses didn't understand this. They tried to get too close, create bonds that shouldn't exist. In the end, they had to leave. What happened to them? That's not relevant. He placed the glass on the desk with more force than necessary. What matters is that you understand your role here. You are here to care for Jacob, educate him, supervise him, not to be his friend, his confidant, or, he made a significant pause, his maternal substitute. Isabel felt a wave of indignation rise in her chest. He is a child who lost his mother. It's natural that he seeks. What is natural, Theo interrupted her abruptly, is not always healthy or safe. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers with an almost physical intensity. There are things in this house, Isabel, that you don't understand, and it's better that it remains that way. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with tension. Isabel could feel her heart beating rapidly, but she kept her gaze steady. "Why did you choose me?" she finally asked. "Of all the possible candidates, why me?" For a moment something passed over Theo's face, an expression so fast that she almost missed it. It almost seemed like recognition. "Your qualifications were adequate," he answered, but there was an almost imperceptible hesitation in his voice. "And you have qualities that we considered important." "What qualities?" He stood up abruptly, moving until he was standing in front of her. Standing, his presence was even more imposing, almost suffocating. Discipline, discretion, and... His eyes ran over her face with a disturbing intensity, a certain familiarity with isolation. Isabel felt a shiver run down her spine. How did he know about her life? About the years spent under the rigid tutelage of her aunt, about the endless masses, about the nights alone in her room, praying the rosary. "You investigated my past," she said. "It wasn't a question." "I investigate everything that enters my house," he responded simply, "especially when it involves Jacob." He extended his hand, and for a terrible and electric moment, Isabel thought he was going to touch her, but his fingers merely brushed the air near her face as if tracing an invisible outline. "You look like her, you know?" he murmured, his voice assuming a different tone, almost hypnotic. "Same way of holding your head, same look, frightened and defiant at the same time." "Like whom?" Isabel whispered, although she already knew the answer. "My wife," he retreated, abruptly, as if burned by his own words. "You may go now. Jacob will wake early tomorrow for his lessons." Isabel stood up with trembling legs, but before she could reach the door, Theo's voice stopped her one last time. "And Isabel? That door at the end of the corridor on the 3rd floor, the one that's locked, never try to open it, under any circumstances." She nodded mechanically and left the library, her heart hammering against her ribs. As she walked through the dark corridors to her room, she couldn't stop thinking about Theo's words, Jacob's look, the shadows that seemed to move on the walls. When she finally reached her room, she found something on her bed, a drawing clearly made by Jacob. It showed a female figure in a long dress standing in front of a closed door. In the lower corner, in childish handwriting, was written, "She's still there." Isabel put the drawing away with trembling hands in her drawer under her folded clothes. That night, lying in her new bed, listening to the strange sounds of the old house, she prayed her rosary until she fell asleep. But her dreams were populated by locked doors, dark gazes, and a distant music that seemed to call her name. The days began to assume a routine in the Harrison mansion. Isabel woke before dawn, the sound of constant rain in the mountains serving as her natural alarm clock. Her mornings were dedicated to lessons with Jacob. Mathematics, history, literature, all adapted to the boy's peculiar rhythm. He was brilliant, absorbing knowledge with a veracity that sometimes frightened her, but there were moments when his eyes lost themselves in something distant, as if listening to a voice that only he could hear. It was during one of these lessons, 2 weeks after her arrival, that Jacob asked the question that would change everything. "You've seen her, haven't you?" he asked while solving a math problem. The woman who sings at night. Isabel froze, the pencil suspended above the notebook. In the last few nights, she had heard something, a soft melody, almost imperceptible, coming from the empty corridors. She had convinced herself that it was just the wind in the old windows. "There is no woman singing, Jacob," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's just the wind." The boy dropped his pencil, his dark eyes fixed on her with a disturbing intensity. "She used to sing to me before the accident, before Daddy—" He stopped abruptly, biting his lip. "Before your father." "What, Jacob?" But the boy had already turned his attention back to the exercises, an invisible wall rising between them. Isabel had learned to recognize these moments. When Jacob closed himself off, nothing could make him speak. At night, while organizing materials for the next day, Isabel heard soft knocks on her door. It was Martha, carrying a tray with tea. "Mr. Harrison would like to see you in the music room," the housekeeper said, her face a mask of poorly disguised concern. "Now." The music room was on the 3rd floor, dangerously close to the forbidden door. It was a majestic room, dominated by a Steinway grand piano and walls covered with shelves of old sheet music. Theo was sitting at the piano when she entered, his fingers sliding soundlessly over the keys. "Jacob told me you play." He spoke without turning around. It wasn't a question. "A little," Isabel admitted. "I learned at the convent where my aunt raised me." "Play something for me." It was a command, not a request. Isabel approached the piano slowly, feeling the weight of Theo's gaze when he stood up to give her space on the bench. Her hands trembled slightly when they touched the ivory keys. She chose Chopin, a nocturne she knew by heart, a piece that spoke of loneliness and contained desire. As she played, she could feel Theo moving behind her, his presence like a warm shadow on her back. "You play like her," he murmured when the last note dissipated in the air. "With the same restraint." Isabel kept her hands on the keys, afraid to move. "Your wife also played the piano?" Elizabeth was a talented musician. His voice took on a different tone when pronouncing the name. "This was her favorite piece." "What really happened to her?" Isabel asked, gathering courage. "Jacob talks as if she was still alive," Theo completed, his voice dangerously soft. He leaned in, his hands resting on Isabel's shoulders with a weight that was both threat and caress. "Some deaths, Isabel, are more complex than others." She could feel the heat of his breath on her neck, the masculine perfume mingled with whiskey. Her heart was beating so hard that she was sure he could hear it. "Why did you bring me here?" she whispered. "Because I need to know if you're really like her." His fingers slightly squeezed her shoulders. "If you have the same resistance." "Resistance to what?" "To me." The sound of a door slamming in the corridor broke the moment. Theo moved away abruptly, and Isabel could breathe again. Martha appeared at the door, her face pale. "Sir, it's Jacob. He's having another episode." Theo quickly left the room, leaving Isabel alone with the piano and thousands of unanswered questions. But when she stood up to leave, something caught her attention, an old sheet of music on the piano, the pages yellowed by time. The title was in French, but what made her stop were the annotations in the margins, in a delicate handwriting. "For my Elizabeth, who knows the price of silence." That night, Jacob's screams echoed through the mansion. Isabel could hear them from her room, sounds of pure terror, interspersed with disconnected words about a singing woman, a locked door, a secret that could not be revealed. When silence finally returned hours later, Isabel couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, listening to the sounds of the house, the creaking of old wood, the whisper of wind in the windows, and something more, a distant melody, almost imperceptible, coming from the direction of the forbidden door. For the first time since her arrival, Isabel allowed herself to consider the possibility she so feared. What if Elizabeth Harrison's death was not an end, but merely the beginning of something much darker? What if Jacob's drawings, his sudden silences, Theo's intense looks, What if all of this was part of a macabre puzzle that she was destined to unravel? But the question that disturbed her most, the one that kept her awake in the dark hours of the early morning, was another. Why, despite all her fear and all her suspicions, couldn't she leave that place? Why, even knowing that there was something deeply wrong in that house, in Theo, in the whole story, did she feel increasingly trapped, not by physical chains, but by something much more powerful and dangerous? Desire. Because there was desire. In Theo's looks, in his restrained touches, in his dominating presence, and there was desire in her too, growing like a poisonous flower in her chest, mixed with fear and fascination in equal parts. It was a desire that her religious education had never prepared her to face, a desire that threatened to consume all her prudence, all her reason. And as the night advanced, and the ghostly music continued its distant lament, Isabel prayed, no longer for protection but for strength. Strength to face what was to come, strength to resist the dangerous magnetism of Theo Harrison, strength to save Jacob, and perhaps, in the process, save herself. The morning after Jacob's episode, Isabel found a new drawing on her work table. This one showed a woman in a long dress in front of a piano, but her face was completely blurred with black pencil, as if someone had tried to violently erase it. In the lower corner, Jacob's childish handwriting had written, "She wants you to know." The routine of that day was interrupted by a particularly strong storm that isolated the mansion even more from the outside world. The electricity fluctuated, creating dancing shadows in the corridors. During the history lesson, a particularly loud thunder made Jacob start in his wheelchair. "She hated storms," the boy murmured, almost to himself. It was when he locked her up there. "Who, Jacob?" Isabel asked softly, her heart accelerating. "Who was locked up?" But before the boy could answer, the door to the study room opened and Theo entered, bringing with him that presence that always seemed to fill the entire environment. "Classes are over for today," he announced, his dark eyes fixed on Isabel. "Jacob needs to rest, and you, Isabel, I would like you to accompany me to my office." Theo's office was an even more intimidating environment than the library. Hunting trophies adorned the walls, their glass eyes seeming to follow every movement. A large oil painting dominated the wall behind his desk, an old family portrait showing generations of the Harrisons. "Sit down," he commanded, serving himself his usual whiskey. This time, to her surprise, he served a second glass. "You look like you need this as much as I do." Isabel accepted the drink with slightly trembling hands. "Is it about the episode last night?" "It's about many things." He sat on the edge of his desk, too close to her. "About the questions you've been asking, about the drawings that Jacob has been leaving for you, about the way you look at that door on the 3rd floor every time you pass by it." She took a sip of the drink, letting the amber liquid burn her throat. "Did you bring me here to fire me?" A humorless smile curved his lips. "No, I brought you here to give you a choice." "What kind of choice?" Theo leaned forward, his face close to hers. "The choice between knowing the truth and keeping your peace of mind." His perfume enveloped her, a mixture of sandalwood, whiskey, and something darker, more primitive. Isabel felt her breathing accelerate. "And if I choose the truth?" "Then, you will have to trust me." His fingers brushed her face, a touch so light it could have been imagination. "Completely." "Like Elizabeth trusted?" His eyes darkened dangerously. "Elizabeth made her own mistakes, as did my brother." "Your brother?" Isabel whispered, feeling she was close to something crucial. "Andrew." The name came out like a curse. Jacob's real father. The revelation fell like lightning between them. Isabel felt the world spin slightly, the whiskey in her stomach turning to acid. "Elizabeth and Andrew," she began. "Were lovers," Theo completed, his voice charged with an old anger. "For years, right under my nose. She got pregnant, tried to pass the child off as mine. But I knew. I always knew. What happened to him? To Andrew? An accident in the mountains." Theo moved away, returning behind his desk as if he needed the distance. "At least, That's what the official report says. The meaning of those words hung in the air between them. Isabel felt a shiver run down her spine. And Elizabeth, was it really suicide? The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the storm raged with renewed force, lightning illuminating the office in dramatic flashes. Elizabeth is exactly where she needs to be, he finally answered, where she can no longer hurt Jacob or herself. She's alive, Isabel whispered, the pieces finally fitting together. The woman who sings at night, so it's her, isn't it? You keep her locked in that door on the 3rd floor. Theo didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened a drawer in his desk and removed an old iron key. As I said, you have a choice to make. He placed the key on the desk between them. You can take this key, discover the truth for yourself, and deal with the consequences. Or you can continue your life here, taking care of Jacob, pretending you don't hear the music at night, ignoring the drawings, the whispers, the shadows in the corridors. And if I choose to leave? You won't. He said this with a certainty that frightened her. You're already too involved. With Jacob, with this house. His eyes met hers with devastating intensity. With me. And he was right. Even now, knowing what she knew, or suspecting what she suspected, Isabel could feel the invisible chains that bound her to that place, to those people. The desire she felt for Theo, even after his revelations, had not diminished. If anything, it had intensified, mixed with a kind of fascinated horror. "Why me?" she asked, her voice just a whisper. "Of all people, why did you choose me?" Theo stood up again, moving until he was in front of her. His hands found her shoulders, sliding to her neck in a caress that was both threat and promise. "Because you are like she was, pure, untouched, but with something darker waiting to awaken." His fingers traced the line of her jaw. "And because, unlike her, you understand the value of control, of restraint. You've lived your whole life in a prison of rules and prayers. My prison wouldn't be so different, would it?" Isabel closed her eyes, feeling his touch like a mark on her skin. When she opened them again, her decision was made. With trembling hands, she took the key from the desk. Theo's smile was that of a satisfied predator. "You have until midnight. Use the key, find your answers. But remember, some truths, once known, cannot be forgotten." When she stood up to leave, he stopped her one last time, his fingers circling her wrist with controlled strength. "And Isabel, no matter what you find up there, no matter what she says, remember that you are mine now, just as she was, just as this house and all its secrets." The storm continued its assault on the mansion when Isabel left the office, the key weighing in her pocket like a mortal secret. In a few hours she would discover the truth behind the nocturnal murmurs, Jacob's drawings, Martha's haunted look. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she couldn't help but think that she was already lost, not because of the secrets of the Harrison house, but because of the man who guarded them. The hours that followed until midnight dragged like an eternity. Isabel remained in her room, the old key burning in her consciousness, while she listened to the storm rage outside. Dinner was cancelled due to the weather, and Martha brought a tray with food that she barely touched. When the old clock of the mansion began to chime the 12 strokes, Isabel was already in the corridor of the 3rd floor, a candle flickering in her hand. The electricity had completely failed an hour ago. The forbidden door was before her, its dark wood marked by old scratches. The key entered the lock with a click that seemed to echo throughout the corridor. Isabel hesitated for a moment, remembering Theo's words about truths that cannot be forgotten, but it was too late to turn back. The interior of the room was a study in contradictions. Elegant furniture covered by white sheets like silent ghosts, an intact 4-poster bed as if waiting for someone, and seated in a rocking chair near the window, a woman. Elizabeth Harrison didn't look anything like a prisoner. Her dark blue silk dress was evidently expensive, her brown hair was well arranged, and there was an open book in her lap. When she turned to Isabel, her face showed what Theo had seen. They were almost identical. "Finally," Elizabeth said, her voice hoarse, as if little used, I was beginning to think he would never allow it. He didn't allow it, Isabel responded, closing the door behind her. He gave me a choice. A sad smile curved Elizabeth's lips. Theo and his choices, always so generous in giving us exactly what he wants us to choose. Why are you here? Why does he keep me prisoner? Elizabeth completed, gently closing the book. Because I knew the truth about Andrew, about Jacob, about the Harrison Empire and all its dirty secrets. Isabel approached slowly, the candle casting dancing shadows on the walls. Jacob is Andrew's son. Yes, but not in the way Theo told you. Elizabeth stood up, moving to the window. Andrew was the older brother, the true heir, and he wasn't like Theo. He didn't have that darkness, that need to control everything and everyone. What really happened? I was promised to Theo since adolescence, agreements between old families, you understand. But Andrew, her voice faltered for a moment. Andrew truly loved me. When I discovered I was pregnant, we planned to flee. We had all the documents that would prove the irregularities in the family business, things that could destroy the Harrison Empire. But something went wrong. Theo discovered Andrew's accident was no accident at all. Elizabeth turned, her eyes shining with contained tears. And then he gave me a choice, just as he gave you. I could disappear, be committed as crazy, or I could stay here close to my son, even if I could never reveal the truth to him. Why are you telling me this now? Because you need to understand who you're dealing with. Elizabeth approached, her floral perfume, the same one that Isabel smelled on her sheets, enveloping her. Theo doesn't love. He possesses. He doesn't protect. He controls. And now he has chosen you, just as he chose me years ago. A particularly strong thunder shook the house, making the candle flame dangerously flicker. Jacob's drawings, Isabel began. He knows. At some level, he always knew. Children have a special way of sensing the truth, even when they can't fully express it. Elizabeth took something from a nearby drawer, a bundle of yellowed papers. These are the proofs that Andrew gathered, records of illegal transactions, documents about mysterious deaths, a history of manipulation and violence that goes back generations. Why are you giving me this? Because you still have a chance to make the choice that I couldn't make. Elizabeth placed the papers in Isabel's hands. You can use this to expose everything, to free Jacob from this heritage of secrets, or you can burn them and accept your place beside Theo, as I accepted my golden prison. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made both freeze. Elizabeth quickly pushed Isabel toward a panel in the wall, which opened, revealing a narrow passage. Go. He can't find you here. Not yet. Her eyes met Isabel's one last time. And remember, you're not the first to think you can save him, that you can transform his obsession into true love. I tried. Others tried. Some disappeared. Others, she gestured to the room around her, found their own kind of prison. Isabel barely had time to hide the documents in her dress before the panel closed, leaving her in the darkness of the secret passage. Through the thin wood, she could hear the door of the room opening, Theo's heavy footsteps. Talking to yourself again, Elizabeth. His voice was soft, dangerous. Just reviewing old memories, dear. It's all I have left, isn't it? You know that this is your own choice, it always has been. Like it was her choice to come here tonight. The sound of something breaking, probably one of the porcelain vases that decorated the room. Don't mention her. Why, because she looks like me, because you hope she'll be more malleable? Enough, Theo's voice thundered. Don't test my patience, Elizabeth. You know what happens when you test it. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of bitterness and resentment. Isabel began to move silently through the passage, her fingers brushing the old walls in search of direction. The corridor seemed to descend, winding through the innards of the house. When she finally found an exit, another panel that opened into the library, her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The documents in her dress weighed like lead, each page a testimony to decades of secrets and crimes. But what weighed most was the awareness that, even now, even knowing everything, a part of her still responded to Theo's dark magnetism, still desired his hands, his kisses, his dominating presence. That was the true horror, not the secrets of the Harrison family, but the discovery of her own inner darkness. In her room, hours later, Isabel sat on her bed with the documents spread before her. The storm had finally passed, leaving only a heavy silence and the occasional drop of rain on the windows. Somewhere in the house she could hear the piano, Elizabeth playing her nocturnal music, her prison transformed into melody. The choice before her was clear. She could use the evidence to destroy Theo and the Harrison empire, freeing Jacob and Elizabeth in the process. Or she could burn everything, accept her place beside him, transform herself into the new mistress of that house of secrets. But there was a third option, one that began to form in her mind as the first lights of dawn tinged the sky pink. An option that would require as much darkness as light, as much love as vengeance. Because maybe, just maybe, the only way to save Theo Harrison was to destroy him first. Dawn brought with it a dense fog that covered the gardens of the mansion like a shroud. Isabel hadn't slept. She had spent the night studying the documents, each page revealing a new layer of the Harrisons' black empire. Suspicious transactions, convenient accidents, people who simply disappeared when they became inconvenient. Her fingers trembled slightly when she stored the papers in a crack she had discovered behind the baseboard of her room. The sound of wheels in the corridor announced Jacob's arrival for his morning lessons, but today would be different. Today, she had a plan. "I want to show you something," she said to the boy as soon as Martha left them alone in the study room. She sat at the piano that occupied a corner of the room and began to play, the same melody that Elizabeth played every night. Jacob's eyes widened in recognition. "It's her music. Did your mother teach you this music?" The boy nodded slowly. Before the accident, she said it was our secret." "Jacob," Isabel began softly, her hands still moving over the keys. "You know that your mother isn't dead, don't you?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Jacob's small hands tightened on the lap of his wheelchair. "Daddy said I can't talk about it," he finally whispered. "He said she's sick, that she needs to stay isolated so she doesn't hurt anyone." "And do you believe that?" Jacob raised his eyes to her, and at that moment he seemed much older than his 9 years. "I see her sometimes, you know, when everyone's asleep. She comes to my room, hugs me, says she's sorry. But in the morning, Daddy always says it was just a dream." Isabel stopped playing, moving to kneel in front of the wheelchair. "And the accident? Do you remember how it happened?" A tremor ran through the boy's small body. "It was raining. Mom and we were leaving. She had a suitcase hidden in the car, but Daddy found out. He appeared on the road. Was he the one who caused the accident?" Jacob nodded, silent tears running down his face. The car skidded. Mom tried to swerve, but his hands tightened even more. "When I woke up in the hospital, I couldn't feel my legs, and Daddy said Mom had died, that it was better that way." Isabel felt her heart tighten. She extended her hand to dry the boy's tears, but before she could touch him, the door to the room opened, violently. Theo was standing in the doorway, his dark eyes fixed on the scene before him. There was something wild in his expression, a barely contained fury that made Isabel instinctively back away. "Jacob," he said, his voice dangerously controlled, "Martha will take you to your room now. You need to rest. But Daddy—" "Now, Jacob." The housekeeper appeared like a shadow, quickly taking the boy away. The look she cast at Isabel was of pure terror. As soon as they were alone, Theo closed the door with a dull thud. "You visited Elizabeth last night." It wasn't a question. Isabel rose slowly, keeping the piano between them as a barrier. "You gave me the key. To test you, to see if I could trust you." He began to approach, circling the piano with measured steps. "And you betrayed me. Just like her." "Betrayed?" Isabel let a bitter laugh escape. "You keep your wife prisoner, lied about her death, caused the accident that left your own son paralyzed, and I'm the traitor. Everything I did," he growled, now dangerously close, "was to protect this family, this legacy." "No." She kept her gaze fixed on his, refusing to back down. "It was to maintain control. Over Elizabeth, over Jacob, over everyone." His hands found her arms with enough force to hurt. "And you? Do you think you can challenge me? That you can change what I am?" "I don't want to change you, Theo." Her voice was firm, even when her heart was beating uncontrollably. "I want you to change yourself, to see what you're doing to your son, to all of us." For a moment something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of doubt, perhaps even regret. But it passed too quickly. "You don't understand," he murmured, one of his hands rising to her neck, fingers tracing her accelerated pulse. "You can't understand what it is to carry this name, this responsibility." "Then explain it to me." She didn't move, even when his fingers closed lightly around her throat. "Make me understand why a father would make his son go through so much suffering." "Because sometimes," he whispered, his face now so close that she could feel his breath, "love isn't enough. Sometimes it takes pain to protect those we love. That's not love, Theo, it's obsession." The words had barely left her lips when he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was violent, possessive, charged with all the anger and desire that pulsed between them. Isabel felt herself responding with equal intensity, her hands burying themselves in his hair, her body betraying all the resistance that her mind was trying to maintain. When he finally moved away, both were breathless. "You are mine," he murmured against her lips, "just like this house, just like all its secrets." "No." She placed her hands on his chest, pushing him slightly. "I'm not yours, not like this. Not until you face the truth about what you did, about who you are." His eyes darkened dangerously. "And if I refuse? Then you will lose me, just as you lost Elizabeth, just as you're losing Jacob." She took a step back, creating distance between them. "The documents she gave me, I could use them to destroy you right now, but I won't." "Why?" "Because unlike you, I believe that true love doesn't need prisons, doesn't need control." She moved toward the door, keeping her eyes on him. "You have until tomorrow, Theo. Free Elizabeth. Tell Jacob the truth, or I will do it for you." With those words, she left the room, leaving him alone with the weight of his choices. Her heart was beating like a wild bird in her chest, part fear, part exultation, because for the first time since she had arrived at that house, she was no longer the prey, she was the hunter. And as she walked through the shadowy corridors of the Harrison mansion, Isabel knew she had initiated something that could not be stopped. A storm was coming, one that threatened to sweep away all the secrets, all the lies, all the prisons that Theo had so carefully built. The question now was, when the dust settled, what or who would still be standing? The night that followed was an exercise in tension. Dinner was served as always, but the silence that hung over the table was different, electrified, pregnant with unspoken possibilities. Jacob kept his eyes fixed on his plate, while Theo drank, more than usual, his dark eyes never leaving Isabel's face. It was after dessert that everything began to change. The sound of the piano echoed through the corridors, Elizabeth playing her nocturnal music louder than normal, as if she knew something was about to happen. "She's calling," Jacob said suddenly, his voice small but firm. "Like that night." Fionn stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "To your room, Jacob, now." "No." The boy raised his chin, a gesture so reminiscent of Elizabeth that it made Isabel hold her breath. "I want to see my mother." "Your mother is dead." "Liar," Jacob shouted, his small hands beating on the arms of the wheelchair. "She's up there. I hear her every night. I see her." "Jacob," Theo began, moving toward his son, but Isabel was faster. "Enough lies," she said, placing herself between father and son. "He deserves the truth. We all deserve it." For a moment, Isabel thought Theo was going to attack her. There was something primitive in his eyes, a barely contained violence that made her heart accelerate. But then another sound joined the piano music, footsteps descending the stairs. Elizabeth was standing at the entrance to the dining room, her dark blue dress floating around her like night water. In her hands, she held the documents that Isabel had hidden, apparently. The secret passage led to more places than she had imagined. "It's over, Theo," Elizabeth said softly. "The kingdom you built with lies, man, is crumbling." "Mom," Jacob's voice trembled. Elizabeth moved to her son, kneeling beside his wheelchair. When she hugged him, the sob that escaped from the boy seemed to carry years of contained pain. "Forgive me, my love," she whispered against his hair. "Forgive me for not being strong enough before." "No." Theo's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "You're not going to do this. You're not going to destroy everything I've built." "You destroyed everything yourself," Isabel intervened, her voice firm. "The moment you chose control over love, power over family." "You don't understand," he growled, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of wild frustration. "Everything I did, every decision, was for the good of this family." "Inu, was for your own good," Elizabeth corrected, still embracing Jacob. "For your fear of losing control, like when you discovered about Andrew, like when you discovered that Jacob wasn't your son." "Andrew was weak," Theo exploded. "He would have destroyed the Harrison legacy with his morality, his scruples." "He was human," Isabel said softly. "Something you've forgotten how to be." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, a new storm was beginning to form, distant thunder echoing among the mountains. "The documents," Theo finally said, his eyes fixed on the papers in Elizabeth's hands. "Give them to me." "No." Elizabeth stood up, keeping a protective hand on Jacob's shoulder. "They're going to the police, along with my testimony about Andrew, about the accident, about everything." "You wouldn't do that." "I would. I will." She took a step toward him. Unless you finally make the right choice. Let Jacob know the truth about his father. Let me go. Allow Isabel." "Allow Isabel what?" he cut in, his eyes turning to the young governess. "Allow her to save you," Elizabeth completed softly, "from what you've become." Something flickered in Theo's face, a mixture of fury and vulnerability that made Isabel's heart tighten. "Save me?" He laughed bitterly. "And who saved Andrew when he needed it? Who saved my father when the creditors came? Who saved this family when we were on the brink of ruin?" He moved to the window, his shoulders tense under his impeccable suit. "I saved everyone with my own hands, with my own choices." "Wrong choices," Isabel approached him slowly, "but there's still time to make the right ones." "How?" He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw tears in his eyes. "How can I simply erase everything I've done?" "You can't." She extended her hand, touching his face softly. "But you can start to fix it. You can choose to be the man that Jacob needs you to be, that I know you can be." The thunder that shook the house seemed to symbolize the moment of decision. Theo closed his eyes, leaning slightly against her hand. "And if I don't know how?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Then we'll show you," she responded, feeling the first drops of rain hitting against the window. Together, the moment extended, charged with possibilities. Elizabeth still held the documents, Jacob still observed with wide eyes, and outside the storm continued to grow. But something had changed in the air, a subtle change, like the first ray of sunlight after a long night. Because sometimes, Isabel realized, true love isn't about keeping someone prisoner, but about giving them the freedom to choose. And now, finally, it was Theo Harrison's turn to make his choice. Theo Harrison's transformation wasn't instantaneous or easy. It began that stormy night, with a confession that lasted hours. Seated in the library, he, Elizabeth, Isabel, and Jacob, the truths emerged one by one, like old wounds finally being exposed to the air to heal. "Andrew discovered first," Theo spoke, his voice hoarse after hours of revelations. "About the embezzlements, the threats, the convenient accidents. Our father had built an empire on bones, and I was following in his footsteps." Jacob, still in his wheelchair, held his mother's hand as if he feared she might disappear again. "Uncle Andrew was my real father." "Yes," Elizabeth answered softly, "and he loved you very much. In the last months before the accident, he was preparing everything to take us away, to start a new, clean life. But I couldn't." "Allow it," Theo continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "The Harrison name was everything I had, everything I was. The idea of Andrew exposing everything, destroying the family legacy." He passed his hands over his face, a gesture of infinite weariness. "I followed him that night, to the mountain road. I didn't want... But you wanted to prevent him from talking," Isabel completed softly. "His car skidded first," Theo continued, his voice just a whisper. "When I saw the lights tumbling down the slope, something inside me died too, my own brother." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace and the distant sound of rain. "And afterward," Elizabeth resumed, "when you discovered I was pregnant..." "I went crazy," Theo admitted. "The idea of raising Andrew's son, of looking at him every day and seeing my brother, I convinced myself it was better to lie, that Jacob needed the Harrison name more than he needed the truth." "And the accident?" Jacob asked, his voice small but firm. "When Mum tried to escape with me." Theo closed his eyes as if the memory was too physical to bear. "I had been drinking. I was furious. When I saw Elizabeth's car on the road, it was like reliving that night with Andrew. I didn't think, I just acted." "You ran us off the road," Elizabeth said, "and afterward, when Jacob was paralyzed, you used my guilt against me. Convinced me it was better for him to think I was dead than to know the truth." "I was wrong," Theo murmured, and for the first time since Isabel had met him, there was true emotion in his voice. About everything, about Andrew, about you, about how to protect this family. Isabel, who until then had been observing in silence, moved close to him. "And now?" "Now..." Theo raised his eyes to meet hers. "Now I want to fix things if there's still a way." It was Jacob who answered, his voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years. "Mom always says it's never too late to do the right thing." The next hours were dedicated to practical decisions. Elizabeth, with the document still in her possession, established her conditions. First, the truth about Andrew would be revealed, along with an official announcement acknowledging Jacob as his son. Second, a significant part of the Harrison fortune would be destined for a fund for the families affected by years of criminal practices of the company. Third, she would have her freedom back, but would remain in the mansion, no longer as a prisoner, but as Jacob's mother. "And us?" Isabel asked when she finally was alone with Theo, the first lights of dawn beginning to penetrate through the library windows. He looked at her for a long time, as if seeing her truly for the first time. "So you should hate me." "Perhaps." She approached, her hands finding his. "But instead I chose to understand you, to help you find your way back." "Why?" "Because I saw beyond the monster you thought you needed to be. I saw the man you still can become." She squeezed his fingers gently. "And because, despite everything, my heart chose to love you." He pulled her to him then, not with the possessive violence of before, but with an almost painful gentleness. When his lips found hers, it was like sealing a new pact, no longer based on control and obsession, but on choice and redemption. Morning found the Harrison mansion different. The curtains were opened, letting light into rooms long kept in shadows. Jacob had his breakfast between his mother and Theo, his laughter echoing through the hall like new music, and Isabel, observing the scene, felt that she was witnessing not just the sunrise, but the birth of a new family. Because sometimes true love isn't about changing someone, but about creating the safe space for that person to find their own change. And there, on that morning of new beginnings, that was exactly what was happening. A man choosing to be better, a family choosing truth, and a love choosing to believe in the possibility of redemption. A year passed since that night of confessions and new beginnings. The Harrison mansion, previously a monument to secrets and control, had transformed. The gardens, now tended by Elizabeth, bloomed with colors that seemed impossible at that altitude. The windows, always open, let in not just light, but also the sound of Jacob's laughter, who was gradually relearning to walk with the help of his physical therapy. Theo had kept his word. The truth about Andrew came to light, along with a formal apology and a plan of reparation to the families affected. By years of obscure Harrison practices, the financial empire, although smaller, was rebuilding itself on more ethical foundations. The deepest change, however, was in Theo himself. The process wasn't easy. There were days when the old demons of control and possessiveness threatened to return. But Isabel was there, firm as an anchor, reminding him of the man he had chosen to become. On that particular morning, she found him in the music room, seated at the piano where so many stories had begun and ended. "Jacob wants you to attend his performance today," she said, approaching. The boy had a piano recital at school, his first since he began to recover movement in his legs. "I'm afraid," Theo admitted, his fingers brushing the keys without pressing. "Of not being worthy, of not deserving this second chance that all of you gave me." Isabel sat beside him on the piano bench. "Merit isn't about deserving, but about honoring the chance we receive." He turned to her, his eyes, once so cold and controlled, now full of a raw and true emotion. "How do you do it? How can you see beyond what I was, what I did? Because I chose to see what you could be, and because—" She smiled softly, guiding his hand to her slightly rounded belly. "Our child deserves to know the father you've become, not the man you were." The news of the pregnancy had come as a surprise 2 weeks before. Theo's initial reaction was fear of repeating his own father's mistakes, fear of not knowing how to love without possessing. But then Jacob, with his childlike wisdom, had said something that changed everything. "Now you can be the kind of father that Uncle Andrew would have been to me." Elizabeth was also pregnant again, a coincidence that seemed more like a sign of renewal. The two women, previously prisoner and substitute, now shared a friendship forged in mutual understanding and forgiveness. "Sometimes," Theo murmured, his hand still on Isabel's belly, "I wake up in the middle of the night in panic, thinking all this is a dream, that I'll open my eyes and go back to being that man, that monster." "But it's not a dream," she responded, intertwining her fingers with his. "It's a choice, one that you make every day when you decide to be better, when you allow Jacob to call you father even knowing the truth, when you look at Elizabeth without resentment, when you love without trying to control." He kissed her then, and in that kiss was the entire journey, from obsession to true love, from control to freedom, from darkness to light. The sound of wheels in the corridor announced Jacob's arrival, now using his chair only occasionally, on days when his legs were more tired. "Dad?" he called from the door. The word that was once a lie now carried a new meaning, a choice of love beyond blood. "It's time." Theo stood up, helping Isabel to do the same. In the mirror of the music room they formed an image that would have seemed impossible a year ago, a family built not on secrets and control, but on truth and redemption. Elizabeth waited for them in the entrance hall, her own belly beginning to show signs of the new life she carried. Together they left the Harrison mansion, no longer a prison of shadows, but a home where light had finally found its place. Because in the end, this wasn't just a story of love between Isabel and Theo. It was a story about the transformative power of true love in all its forms. Between parents and children, between brothers even beyond death, between a man and his own dark past. And as the car descended the mountain road toward Jacob's recital, Isabel looked at the mansion through the rear window. The mist that always hung over the property now seemed more like a protective veil than a curtain of secrets. The century-old trees, which previously seemed sentinels of a prison, were now guardians of a new story, a story of redemption, of second chances, of love that liberates instead of imprisoning. Theo held her hand, and in the gentle squeeze of his fingers was the promise of all the tomorrows they would build together. No longer as jailer and prisoner, master and servant, or predator and prey, but as equals, as lovers, as souls that chose to walk together toward the light. because sometimes the truest love isn't one that completes us, but one that challenges us to complete ourselves. And in the Harrison mansion,